Hello everyone, welcome to the Thinking Marketing Podcast, where we cover the thinking of cutting-edge marketers. Today, I'm joined by Nick Candler. He's a paid social creative strategist who's worked to scale the ads of some of the world's leading advertisers. He was recently at Calm, where he helped the brand drive over 1.2 million subscriptions, as well as reaching over 1 billion people through their ads. He's now running his own agency called 10 Scale, as well as blogging on his own blog called The Meta Game. He got on my radar as one of my friends sent me one of his posts and told me to check it out because this is some cutting edge stuff. After that, I read all the content on The Meta Game, and I can't recommend it enough to anyone who's interested in improving their creative testing strategy. He breaks it down to the fundamentals and takes inspiration from things like philosophy, psychology, and even music. So it's a great inspiration and learning resource for any marketer out there. In today's episode, we go through the basics of his framework, as well as how you build a good team for creative testing and improvement. If you enjoyed the conversation today, make sure to follow my newsletter at thinkingmarketing.io, as well as me on social media channels. And without further ado, here's the conversation with Nick Candler. You recently posted a structure for creative development where you talk about creative development as building blocks, where you start from scratch and then work your way up. Can you talk a little bit about this framework and how it can be applied in business?
Basically, it's a spectrum starting from the most mechanical aspects, going all the way up to the most abstract creative aspects of ads, like totally new things that no one's ever done. I call the most basic aspect of what I teach people the basic iteration, and it applies mainly to video ads, but it's where you sort of isolate the 4 largest levers, which in my experience are the text hook, the visual hook, next is the copy sequence, and the visuals that move with it. Just breaking those things down and iterating on that level, you can create wins almost indefinitely. So that's usually the first step. And then after that, it's more about like copywriting, the sequences that you write, how to see things sort of from the 1,000-foot view, smash together different concepts, how to integrate frameworks from like kind of further industries that aren't in your specific vertical, how to see new trends that are happening in social media and then translate them into paid.
Okay, cool. So if you're at the basic level of the framework, then you have hook, visual hook, then like copy, storytelling, stuff like that. And you can isolate, and I say, okay, I have this ad for the next iteration. I'm just going to change the visual hook. And you apply a new visual hook, but keep the other things the same. And then you test them against one another. Is that how you can use it?
Yeah, exactly. It's both pragmatic in the sense of like for really large advertisers spending maybe 6 figures a day, volume is one of the most important things, and that's really helpful in helping brands like that create enough creative to sustain a pipeline. But it's also really useful, a sort of foundational perspective. It's like playing scales in music or something, or like the basic footwork in forms of dance. It's just like every day, this is, as a creative strategy practitioner, something to warm up with.
Okay, cool. So the first step, I see like how you can iterate and get new ideas. Then if you want to go to the next level of the meta game, how do you then like get the ideas?
So once you sort of have a sense of like all the individual levers on like what your critical value propositions are and like 1 or 2 copy frameworks, you can start remixing everything and thinking about like the sequencing and flow and rhythm. A lot of it will be like listicles where it's like 3 reasons, and then it has social proof, and then it has like call to actions or accolades, stuff like that. You can be like, okay, what would it be to alternate this sort of logical reasoning with social proof? And so it's like reason, social proof. And that creates an entirely different flow and feeling and taps an entirely different type of audience. Sort of like being a DJ. Once you understand the hits, you can like think about how you want to match them together. But then like a level higher, thinking about like, what are the ways that I'm not thinking about this? Like, what are the structures? What are the ways of sort of thinking about this more conceptually?
I have myself tried to build these frameworks, the first step is like actually trying to build it, but then starting to test it, I sometimes have a hard time keeping a structure where I actually can follow it over time. What would be your tips for structuring yourself to stick within the framework and make sure that you're iterating on specific things?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think wherever possible, using just strict controls. So, if you're on that very basic level, you would test like just text hooks or just visual hooks. But it does get a little more difficult at like the next levels where it gets more abstract. And at that point, just trying to like use your boilerplate language that you've seen to be the highest impact in the past. Like, if you're trying a new concept, you shouldn't be also bringing in new language. Like, you should be using the language that at this exact moment is hitting for you the hardest.
The lowest level in one of your frameworks is that you copy competitors and then you go from there. So if I'm a new advertiser or I'm an advertiser that aren't doing really well, would you always suggest to start looking at the competition and testing kind of what they are doing?
A lot of people jumpstart their ads program this way and it works great. If you are only spending like $2,000 a day, you really don't have capacity to test many things. You can just take someone else's ad strategy, and then it gets a little more complicated when you have a different type of product, or you're like, you just have a different offering. Then you have to think contextually and adjust to either the messaging or pull concepts from sort of a wider pool.
So that's really interesting. If I'm an advertiser and I don't have a clear vertical to look at and take inspiration from, where would you start in the creative development? Would you start with audience research, like going to the product and see what is this product really for the customers? Or where do you start to get those first initial hypotheses?
Yeah, some basic user research goes a long way, and like sort of understanding what are the critical wedges of what people are experiencing here, what's really the problem, and what value are people getting from this. But it doesn't necessarily always translate. I was working with like a couples app, for instance, and a lot of the value people were getting were some of the more psychological things, but it's also kind of a game. So the app, so a lot of their messaging was really around like the more fun. I mean, sex sells, I'll say that much. Humor and levity hit a lot harder than the thing people were actually seemingly getting out of the product. And it was really only by testing concepts that probably hit a little harder with brands outside of that vertical that they were able to land on where they were at.
Okay, cool. So then you can identify a few like potential values, etc., and then test them in different hooks, copy, and then iterate on them.
Or try to figure out like what apps overlap a little bit in the value people are getting. Like if this app specifically, like borrowing from Hims, the men's health app, which has a lot of messaging around like sex and stuff of that nature, and integrating some of the things that were working for them. We also saw that hit for this app, which is kind of an entirely different product.
How do you build a framework and a process for creative production and also follow-up that will enable you to really test and learn which creatives that are working well?
So on the production side, I would try to match functionally to the creative strategy as much as possible. The inputs for the system for like ticketing are really similar to the way that we want to think about iterating. Okay, these are tickets for iteration. These are tickets for concepting. And when you're doing things that are super conceptual, there's just going to have to be a lot of autonomy on the design side, and it's going to be more general. But on the iterative tickets, it's super prescriptive. It's like, this is the text, this is the hook. And that kind of lies on the creative strategist. The whole point is to reduce friction in the process as much as possible. The team should just be reflecting on what's slowing us down in this whole thing, and just pulling up like once a month or once every 2 months in a retro.
And for the follow-up, how do you set a good follow-up in process that enables everyone to learn?
I mean, that's a great question. That maybe is the most critically important part of the whole thing, and getting in the rhythm of meeting like once a week to review data. And ideally data is delivered in like a consistent and understandable way for creatives. Like, the goal should be to bring all the media buyers and like typically technical folks closer to the creative side, and then the creative people who think that way closer to the data side by only focusing on like one or two key metrics and making it really easy to understand. Whoever's running the meeting should be pulling people in and getting them to talk about the creative and what they think interesting iterations might be. And then you can use that data meeting not only as a way to help people gain understanding, but as a way of actually functionally building the production pipeline as well.
So you're like learning and also while doing that, planning the next step kind of.
That can power like 30, 40, 50% of the entire creative pipeline. And then like oftentimes in isolation, when people go off and like do their own thing and brainstorm, like a lot of good ideas can come from that, but oftentimes it might take hours. So this is a way of streamlining a big part of the production pipeline.
What would a good team look like, and what would the people in those different functions need to be good at to have a good paid ads creative team?
I'm really a fan of like this role of the creative strategist, and the creative strategist is like the point guard. They need to have a good understanding of what's going on both sides. I think if I had to pick one side, I would have them be better media buyers than creatives, because media buying is just so ROI focused that I think that context helps a lot. And so much of the creative strategist role is very iterative that it's not super important for them to be like an amazing creative. On the flip side, you need good creatives, people who can execute really well, people who can translate like the information into ads, and who can be very pragmatic about how to balance making something interesting with the time constraints. And then you kind of need someone who can oversee the whole thing and who's just making sure the team functions really well. So that's sort of like a creative director, or like a director of growth, or something like that.
So that was it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I have another one with Nick coming out in a few weeks. Until then, I really recommend that you read the content on the metagame. It's going to blow your mind. As well as follow my newsletter on thinkingmarketing.io and me on social media channels. Until next time, have a great day.